And so I got a lot of information from the lady Soyador. But that was in 1973, yeah, 1973. But now we're 20 years later. No, 1990, yeah, 1991, 92, that period. So the Buddhist Publication Society had published Narada's Manual of Abhidhamma, and we had run out of stock, and so it had to be reprinted. And it was my task as editor to go through and make some editorial changes. But as I was going through it, I saw there was a lot of more information that was needed to make it clear. And so I started to compose to each of the sections an explanatory guide. And then I would get information from a Burmese monk, a well-known Burmese monk living in England. This was Theravāda Dhamma Soyador. So I got information from him. And then one of my friends, a nun, who was ordained as a nun in Sri Lanka, then went back to the United States. She had studied Abhidhamma with another Burmese Soyador, U Silananda Soyador, and she had many of these tables and charts, Abhidhamma tables and charts, which she sent to me. And then I got permission from U Silananda to use those charts and tables in this manual. And I got some other charts and tables from the Abhidhamma works published by the Pali Text Society. So it's very much a collaborative endeavor, that book.
So that is great background just to see how much effort you and others put into bringing this work about. And the theme I'd like to draw for this one is just the value of Abhidhamma. This is, very much questioned. You know, some people may be new to Buddhism. You hear about the Tripitaka, these 3 baskets of Buddhism, and people would think that all Buddhists hold all 3 of them in the same high regard. Whereas similar to, with the commentaries, there are schools of Buddhism, maybe traditional Buddhists, conservative Buddhists. Abhidhamma is held as even more foundational than the suttas. And then you've got people who just say, oh, it's clearly, every historian agrees that it's later material. Later generations just, kind of overly analytical, brainy monks, just kind of compiled this, made it up, saw these connections and just dismiss it.
Too much time on the hand.
Exactly.
They didn't want to meditate, so they needed some way, instead of just sitting on the veranda and chewing the beetles, they needed something to take up their time.
Yeah, exactly. So how do you personally reconcile that? What do you feel is the value of Abhidhamma?
First I agree with the historical, the critical historical perspective, which is that the Abhidhamma is clearly, as it's come down to us, a product of later generations. The full detailed systematization of the teachings that becomes the Abhidhamma Pitaka. But I believe that what we call the Abhidhamma probably began with discussions amongst monks to explore in greater detail, in a kind of analytical detail, issues arising out of the Dhamma that we have in the suttas. So to provide, on the one hand, we would say, provide detailed sort of formal definitions of terms that we find in the suttas, and then to explore the relations between the different concepts that we find in the suttas. And so I think that would have been, maybe we call this a primitive Abhidhamma in the pre-literary phase. And maybe that was a kind of common core, which then, as the different monastic establishments set up their monasteries in different parts of India, that maybe all would have inherited to some degree that common core, and then they would have elaborated that common core in their own way, in accordance with the thinking of the prominent Dharma masters of their respective schools, probably working collaboratively, because at least in the Theravada Abhidhamma, we don't have particular works ascribed to individuals, where I believe in the Sarvastivada school, the different books are ascribed to prominent individual monks.
Interesting.
Yeah, so the Theravada school ascribes the Abhidhamma to the Buddha, but we don't find any text in which the Buddha is said to be teaching the Abhidhamma. So my belief would be the Abhidhamma is a collaborative work that reaches its canonical form over several centuries, maybe about 3 centuries. As for the value of the Abhidhamma, I say, first you have to be careful with the Abhidhamma, because I think people learn all of these very detailed concepts and the systematic analysis, memorize it, and think that this means that they're increasing in their wisdom or in their understanding of the Dhamma. But you could see the Abhidhamma providing a very detailed way of understanding the mind, the nature of the mind, different potential states of mind, and the nature of material phenomena and their interrelationships. In fact, I think not in this work. It was in my introduction to Nyanaponika Thera's Abhidhamma studies. I think it was there. I said that we could connect the project of the Abhidhamma with the Four Noble Truths. Okay, so we have the Noble Truth of dukkha, which turns out to be the 5 aggregates and the 12 sense bases and 18 elements. And so when we have the detailed analysis of mentality, mind, mental factors, and material form in the Abhidhamma, that's the kind of detailed laying out, mapping out of the first Noble Truth, just like Sariputta does in a more elementary way in the greater discourse on the elephant's footprint, Majjhima number 28. So the Abhidhamma carries that out in much greater detail, and with regard to mind, not only matter. Okay, then a large part of the Abhidhamma, particularly Dhammasangani, is concerned with all of the defilements that have to be eliminated and their relationships to each other and to mental and material phenomena. So that's a kind of detailed treatment of the second Noble Truth. The Abhidhamma doesn't say very much about the third Noble Truth. It just always brings it in as the asankata dhatu, the unconditioned element, and then elaborating upon it as the negation of the different defiled factors in the other 2 truths. And then a large part of the Abhidhamma, particularly we find this in the Vibhanga, the second book, gives detailed expositions of the 7 groups, which become the 37 Bodhipakkhya Dhammas, factors leading to enlightenment. So we find detailed technical analysis and elaborations on those factors. So that becomes a detailed treatment of the fourth Noble Truth. So you could almost take the Abhidhamma, at least those major books, and move their contents, or frame their contents, or put their contents into the framework of the Four Noble Truths.
Wow, that's incredible. I think I did read your intro to Abhidhamma studies and didn't see that there, but looking.
Well, maybe I brought that idea in when I gave some introductory lectures on the Abhidhamma.
It's so good, and it does just, I mean, the last book on the shelf, which I'm not sure we'll get to today, is your most recent one, Noble Truths, Noble Path, and which is all about the Four Noble Truths. And that is kind of where orthodoxy or ontology, the way things are, meet with orthopraxy, or like the practical, like what you can actually do about it. So I think if someone had explained Abhidhamma to me the way you just did, as here's details of the Four Noble Truths, further definitions to understand them better, I think I would have put more time into the study. But for the sake of moving forward, get to the first of your Bhikkhu Bodhi quintet, number 2.
Yeah.
So this is the Middle Length Discourses of the Buddha, which is your collating and work with Nyanamoli's manuscript and filling it out to fill out the Middle Length Discourses.
Yeah.
So myself and Ajahn Nispo right now are doing this Mission Majjhima project, and you said that you watched one of the videos and you thought it was well done.
2 of them, yeah.
2 of them.
The introductory one and then the one on the Mula Pariyaya.
Good stuff, everybody. You should check it out. But with this book, there's so many themes that we could draw out here. But one that I thought to draw out is just the theme of the Buddha, who the Buddha was, who is this character of the Buddha. You know, even just having gone through 10 suttas so far in that Mission Majjhima Sutra, Mission Majjhima project, anyone who reads it meets a very human Buddha. This is someone who's walking around in places that still exist. And that's somewhat perhaps at odds with people in some Buddhist schools even who have a more grandiose or even deified idea of the Buddha. But we also find a human who reaches a transcendent state, which is also something which other modern Buddhists might just say, oh, there's no real end to greed, anger, and delusion. You know, he could see them very well, and that's his transcendence. But how would you draw this theme of, as you were translating this and just through your whole growing understanding of the Buddha, who or what was the Buddha, and what was, maybe that's a place to start.
Okay, but first I want to modestly say that the translation of the Majjhima Nikaya is not my work. As you know, it's the work, there were these manuscripts left by the great British translator Bhikkhu Nyanamoli, who died suddenly and unexpectedly at the age of 54, and nobody knew that he had translated the Majjhima Nikaya. He was very modest and reclusive and didn't tell people what he was working on. And so after his death, when they went to his cabinet, they found these 3 notebooks, hand-bound notebooks, big notebooks, which they saw was a translation of the Majjhima Nikaya.
Handwritten or typed? Or?
No, handwritten.
Wow.
With a fountain pen. And so they sent them up to Kandy, to Venerable Nyanaponika, and he was keeping them in he had a big trunk, he was keeping them in the trunk. And I think it's 1976, that time the British monk, Bhikkhu Kantipalo, came to Sri Lanka, and he selected, I think, 90 suttas from those notebooks and had them typed up and published in 3 volumes in Thailand, in Bangkok. Then, at that time, the executive director of Wisdom Publications had heard that Nyanamoli had left behind a complete translation of the Majjhima Nikaya. And Wisdom had already published Maurice Walsh's translation of the Digha Nikaya. So Wisdom wanted to publish the Majjhima Nikaya. So they wrote to Venerable Nyanaponika saying that they heard that Nyanaponika has the handwritten notebooks of Venerable Nyanamoli's translation of the Majjhima Nikaya. Can you, Nyanaponika, please prepare them for us for publication? And Venerable Nyanaponika is 83 years old at the time, so he writes back that I'm now 83, my vision is deteriorating, but I have a young American monk staying with me who has a good knowledge of Pali, who's done some previous translation work. I'm putting that task onto him. So then I prepared those notebooks. We went through Nyanamoli's translation. I made some modifications in his terminology, and then I added the introduction, notes, glossary, index, and maybe some other back features. Okay, as for that's sort of the
Yeah,
background,
that's
but then
great background.
the question was how I see the Buddha.
Yeah, the person of the Buddha. How does that emerge from this work and
You
your
know, you say
understanding?
that the Buddha is very human, but the Buddha as depicted doesn't have the faults of a human being. So this is
Mm,
not a humanized Buddha in the sense, oh, he has all of the faults, the weaknesses, the defects, the shortcomings that any other human being has.
mm,
This is a being who's human in that he's living in the human world. And as he gives his account, he starts off as a deluded worldling, as one who lives pursuing, he says, how did I, pursuing things that are subject to decay, to birth, old decay, and destruction. And he enumerates. So he was living as a human being, but once he achieves Buddhahood, like all of the defilements are gone. All you never see the Buddha saying when he's asked a question, saying, "Oh, I don't really know the answer to that."
mm-hmm,
You know, he'll be asked questions that are considered irrelevant. He'll put them aside,
mm-hmm,
but he is still a human being. But he's a human being from whom all, let's say, emotive, defiling emotions have been eliminated, and all obstructions to proper cognition, proper understanding have been shattered and taken down.
mm-hmm. Yeah, no, that's fascinating because even as I was saying, in different Buddhist schools, you've
Yeah.
got, say, a commentarial understanding that the Buddha was like an uber human in that he's like, I don't know, 2 meters or 3 meters tall and, has,
That's rather strange in the commentaries
yeah,
because, I mean, they always say that if the Buddha's invited to a house for a meal, the house owner doesn't break down the wall, open up the door so that the being 2 meters
yeah.
high can get through.
Right, right. I hadn't thought of that.
Yeah, no one sees the Buddha moving around. He might have been, I mean, he's from the Kshatriya warrior clan,
Yeah,
so he must have been tall and strong physically, but not superhuman tall.
right. And you don't get the image of a Buddha that you find maybe in other schools that have like this, like a celestial or a Sambhogakaya,
Yeah, that
Nirmanakaya,
is what you find
yeah,
in at least in
Yogacara,
some of the Mahayana
Mahayana,
sutras, where
yeah,
the sutra always begins that the Buddha enters, and well, it starts off at the sutta. It seems like the human Buddha,
mm-hmm,
but then he goes into samadhi, and either within the samadhi or coming out from the samadhi, he radiates beams of light that spread out to all the 10 directions,
mm-hmm,
and then other world systems appear, and the Buddhas in those world systems appear, and those Buddhas send their attendant bodhisattvas to visit the Buddha Shakyamuni.
yeah,
So you get a kind of, it's a scene that puts the heavenly realms to shame with
right,
it.
right, right, right. Or in the Lotus Sutra, where he didn't actually attain enlightenment. He wasn't even born. He was, yeah, he was always enlightened,
Yeah,
and it was just kind of a
yeah,
show to
yeah,
inspire some
yeah,
people.
yeah.
So that's not what you find in the Pali.
No, no, one finds very
Yeah.
clear that he's, how does he put, I too, before my enlightenment, it's in Majjhima number 26. I have to look in the
Mm,
sutta to get
mm,
the exact wording. I too, as one subject to old age, sought after things that are also subject to
mm,
decay. As one subject to death, I sought things that are also subject to death. As one subject to defilements, I sought things that are
mm.
subject to defilements.
The Arya Pariyesana Sutta,
Yeah,
the
that's the
Noble
Arya
Search.
Pariyesana Sutta.
Well, I think what you're mentioning about, you know, shooting out the rays and all
Yeah.
these other beings occurring, I mean, that's kind of leads into the next theme I'd like to draw out is, as I understand it, your understanding and the picture that emerges from the Pali Nikayas is this theme of the Buddhist worldview, the Buddhist cosmology, the Buddhist universe. And so this is the Connected Discourses of the Buddha, which you translated next, and would love to hear anything you wanted to say about this. And then also to just draw this theme, the first two Samyuttas, or grouped discourses, are about devas and young devas. And so the picture that emerges of a Buddhist cosmos is not a secular Western materialist worldview. So curious if you would be willing to kind of draw that out. The implications of that.
Okay, these are things that I can't say definitively on the basis of any kind of supersensory vision. But the Buddha is lauded in the suttas. One of the 9 epithets, qualities of the Buddha is Satta Deva Manusanam. So he's the teacher of devas, deities in human beings. And in, I think, probably all the Nikayas, we see encounters between the Buddha and deities, and it's the deities that come to the Buddha for instruction, for guidance. It's not the Buddha going to the gods for guidance. And so it could be, it could swing either way. One way to look at it, like these verse collections, which are the discourses with the devas and with the young devas, and then later there's discourses with yakas. You could take a kind of critical, maybe secular, skeptical view that, okay, there were these verses and legends floating around, and they came to be incorporated in these collections, sort of like floating verses. In fact, some of the verses that one finds in, say, the Deva Samyutta, one will find elsewhere, maybe in the Theravāda ascribed to monks and nuns, or elsewhere ascribed to the Buddha himself. So one just don't know how these verses arose, these verse collections. So in my own way of thinking, I just have no doubt that there are multiple realms of existence, Deva realms, and that since the Buddha is a supremely enlightened one, and part of his mission is to proclaim the Dhamma amongst devas and human beings, that devas would have come to the Buddha for instruction. The Buddha would have used means, these iddhis, supernormal powers, to go to the deva worlds to instruct the devas. And I find it's just sort of the limits of our own knowledge that make us, that generate skepticism about the existence of these other realms. And probably, I have to say, in our highly industrialized, technological societies, they chase the devas away.
The actual machinery of...
The devas, like sort of clean, pure environments, sparsely populated. So maybe in areas where people are living very simple, traditional lives, very quiet, no mechanical devices, electric power devices, electronic devices, the devas would find it much more congenial to come and to interact with human beings.
Something which I think many appreciate about the way that you talk about the suttas. Obviously your knowledge of the scope of the suttas is pretty comprehensive, but you're so careful about ascribing, what is in the suttas versus your own belief. And it makes sense. Doug Smith, is in your Pali class, and he certainly can appreciate, he's, very much has secular Buddhist roots. But you speak about these things so carefully that you don't try to impose what your belief is on anyone else. I am curious if you could speak to the usefulness or the benefit of being open to adopting this view. It's part of mundane right view, as you find in the Great 40 Sutta of Majjhima, Majjhima Nikaya, that there is this world, there is the next world,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
there are spontaneously
Yeah.
arisen beings. So that's part of the suttas.
Yeah.
And what utility does that serve, taking on that view or that belief?
Okay, the understanding of, you could even call it belief, in multiple planes of existence, well, helps us to get what I call the comprehensive background view of what's entailed by adopting the Buddha Dhamma and practicing the Buddha Dhamma. And so when you reject all of those other realms of existence, reject the teaching of rebirth, and then you give a purely temporal or secular interpretation to karma, so that karma loses its capacity. Since there are no other realms of existence and no rebirth, then karma, you'd left with just a purely psychological interpretation of karma, which I've seen so widespread amongst Western Buddhists, which really loses the full meaning of karma. Okay, so when you have this view of other realms, the multiple realms of existence, coupled with the teaching of rebirth, then you see the vast cosmic background against which the drama of the Buddha Dhamma unfolds, that it's a way to liberation from this process of repeated existence, which can take place in many, many different dimensions of existence. And you also come to understand, this is from a very powerful ethical point of view, the capacity or potency of our different actions and our different moral choices. One understands that our behavior, our conduct, has the capacity to lead to existence, even over long periods of time, in either higher worlds, more blissful, more peaceful worlds, or in lower worlds, in realms of intense suffering. If you just take a purely secular view, you can still have very high moral standards so that you wouldn't act unethically, but let us say the understanding of the potentialities of ethical, of moral and immoral behavior are circumscribed by the limits of one's view, the limits of one's understanding.
Wow, thank you. I think I'll have to listen to that again. We're actually making surprisingly okay time. This next work are the numerical discourses of the Buddha, the translation of the Anguttara Nikaya, and I believe this was published in 2011 or 2013. At any rate, it was something around then. And I remember being, as a young monk...
It might have been 2012?
Yeah, that's what this one was.
2012.
2012.
Yeah.
And I remember I came to a monastery in 2006, and I remember reading partial translations from wheel publications of certain suttas, and just being so excited hearing rumors that this was going to be put out.
In 2006?
That's when I first came to the monastery.
Yeah.
Well, and then maybe not then yet, but then when I moved to Abhayagiri and ordained certainly in 2010, there's always this anticipation, any day it's going to come out. And so I was so excited when it finally did. And there's obviously so much that we could draw out of this work, which is, for people who haven't read, any of these, as you can see, they're beautifully made. These wisdom editions, they sit beautifully on your shelf, and even better if you can read them. Great, amazing index and notes. In this volume especially, Bhante starts going and comparing with the Chinese agamas, so other related versions of the suttas. One thing I thought to draw out from this is just the Uttara Sutta, which we've been just talking about on our walks. So this is Anguttara 8.8. And the principle that's said there is, whatever is well spoken, subhasitang, that all that whatever is well spoken is all the word of the Blessed One, the Noble One, the perfectly enlightened one. And that's a huge opening. It's said by a monk, and then sort of approved by the Buddha, or the Buddha says something similar. But what is your understanding? That seems like a big opening for a lot. I mean, the Mahayana canon is different from the Theravāda canon in that they include things that they don't even try to pretend that it's the word of the Buddha. Like the Six Patriarch Sutra from 500, 600 AD is in the Chinese Mahayana canon. But you don't find anything that's expressly and admittedly later in the Pali Canon. I mean, in that, traditionally speaking, people would say even these works like Buddhacharya, Apadana, Buddhavamsa, Charipitaka, those are, it seems like from a different strata, but Mahayana takes it to another level. And here's a monk who lived, maybe 900 years, 800 years after, 1,000 years after the Buddha, and that's included. But so how do you understand the import, this theme of whatever is well said is all the word of the Buddha?
I think one has to be a bit cautious with that. Because then, as I said yesterday evening, then you could include maybe the Sermon of the Mount is very beautiful. You could say that's the word of the Buddha. Maybe if there's good sayings of Albert Einstein or some contemporary wise writer, say that's Buddha Vachana. No, I think we need some criterion for distinguishing what's Buddha Vachana is, what's not. But say things like the Mahayana Sutras, I wouldn't say that the Buddha Vachana in any kind of literal sense that they were spoken by the Buddha, but one could say that at least some principles in the Mahayana Sutras maybe are the ways like later generations are trying to draw out implications from principles laid out in the Buddhism of the archaic period, and then sort of develop them in a new direction, maybe to form like the doctrinal backdrop to the Bodhisattva path.
Yeah, that's kind of just the opening that statement
I
makes.
like to keep the expression Buddha Vachana pretty much confined to things that we could reasonably ascribe to the historical Buddha. So I don't even like to say that the Abhidhamma is Buddha Vachana. I say that it's an elaboration of the teachings of the Buddha, that they've received, or the Abhidhamma treatises have received canonical status. So we have to say that it's, in one sense, it's Buddha Vachana, and that is part of the Pali Canon. But if you take Buddha Vachana as things that are actually spoken by the Buddha, or that can be reasonably ascribed to him, then I say the Abhidhamma is not Buddha Vachana, but it doesn't mean that it's anti-Buddha Vachana.
That's a good distinction. That's a very useful distinction. I might so the Sutta Nipata is the fourth of the quartet, part 2. Going to this next book, which I've read, and I think many people, it's part of the curriculum at Dharma Buddhist University, the Buddhist Teachings on Social and Communal Harmony. And this has fantastic teachings from the canon with your commentary and introduction about being generous, about keeping precepts and having a moral sensitivity, about service, about family relations. The theme that I'd be curious to draw out would be specifically about generosity. I mean, and I know you've done a lot in the field of generosity and Buddhist generosity, your work with Buddhist Global Relief. Could you speak to that?
Okay, the seed idea that eventually developed into Buddhist Global Relief, this goes back to the time when the South Asian tsunami took place, and it struck the countries of Southeast Asia, including Sri Lanka. And when I heard that news, I was living at another monastery, at a place called Bodhi Monastery in New Jersey. I wanted to raise funds to provide to organizations doing relief work in Sri Lanka. And so I sent out an email to some of my students at Bodhi Monastery, but I also sent the email to Bhante Gunaratna at the Bhavana Society, who sent it out to everybody on his mailing list, the Bhavana Society mailing list. And I sent it to a woman who was, I think, on the board of the Insight Meditation Center in New York City, the branch of IMS in New York City. And she sent it to everybody on their mailing list. So within about 2 weeks, we got about $160,000. And then it was my task to find the organizations to provide it, to distribute that money to. And I think it was Google, I think, had compiled a list of organizations that were working in Sri Lanka. And I thought I would choose Buddhist organizations. And I looked at the list, and there were many Christian organizations, Jewish organizations, Muslim organizations. But I think I came across maybe 2 Buddhist organizations, the Tzuchi Foundation, which is based in Taiwan, and maybe Sarvodaya. And it struck me, in Buddhism, we speak so much about kindness, compassion, generosity, but when it comes to really helping people in need, people in urgent, critical need, we're missing in action.
Right.
And so in 2007, the Buddhist magazine, Buddha Dharma, invited me to write an editorial essay. And so I wrote an essay pointing out, in my opinion, how Buddhism or Buddhists are not looking at what I call the real, concrete, tangible suffering that affects billions of people around the world as their everyday reality. We just have these sometimes these grandiose, beautiful ideas of sitting in the meditation hall. I've got given these instructions thousands of times, sending loving kindness, spreading the light of loving kindness to envelop the whole globe. But when it comes to actually getting onto, rolling up our sleeves and getting on the ground, we're absent. And so I wrote that essay, and then Buddha Dhamma titled it A Challenge to Buddhists. Then I didn't tell any of my friends or students about it, but some of them got the magazine and read it. And then we started having some conversation that it's necessary for us as Buddhists to take up the challenge that was presented in that essay. And so we had these initial discussions, and then we decided to form a Buddhist relief organization. And then we needed a specific mission, a particular focus. And we decided to focus on the problem of chronic hunger and malnutrition around the world. And so we started with a few projects. But then as we went on, just with 3 preliminary projects, pilot projects, as we looked into the underlying roots of hunger and malnutrition and poverty around the world, 2 of the factors that stood out was the subordinate status of girls in many traditional societies, was one, and the subordinate status of women in traditional societies, the lack of educational opportunities for girls. And so we expanded our mission. Instead of just providing direct food aid, but that is one sort of task, is providing direct food aid to people affected directly by hunger and malnutrition. But a second approach is providing opportunities for girls to go to school and to continue their education, even through high school and university. And then a third prong, so to speak, is to give women the opportunity to support women and give them the opportunity to start right livelihood projects or to find employment in order to earn more to support their family.
And people can find out more information at Buddhist
Yeah, they
Global
can just
Relief.
simply go to Google and go search for Buddhist Global Relief.
Okay. Yeah, it is a very good point to look at. Like, how is one giving? How is one being generous in one's life? And there is a narrow Buddhist view which you point to of like, that maybe the act of generosity that you see most in the suttas is just giving to monks. Whereas this Buddhist Global Relief is a bigger vision. And the Buddha praised that. The Buddha said, someone asked, where should I give? And he says, give where you feel inspired. And so this is a really useful organization. I hope people can support it.
Yeah, we started with 3 projects, as I mentioned, in 2008. And currently we have almost 60 projects in countries ranging from Mongolia, Cambodia, Vietnam, Thailand, Sri Lanka, Sri Lanka, India, then several African countries, Uganda, Malawi, Cote d'Ivoire, Haiti, Nicaragua, Peru, and some places in the United States.
Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. Maybe just one last book?
Yeah.
All right. So this is one of your recent books, reading the Buddha's discourses in Pali. And I think that it takes different suttas and gives a word-by-word analysis in Pali, and it's just a great resource for maybe intermediate level or beginner intermediate level Pali students.
Maybe not beginner.
Okay, intermediate.
Unless they're extremely talented with languages.
Super talented. And so the theme I want to draw out here is just the value of Pali. What's the value that you've found in learning and studying in the Pali language? And I think that would be useful to draw out.
Okay, one thing is that Pali is phonetically, it's a very beautiful language. The sounds, the rhythm. And then when you read it, this uncertainty whether Pali is the actual language used by the Buddha himself. But even if the Buddha used a somewhat different language, Pali and the language that the Buddha used would have been very, very close. One is just a dialect of the other. And so when you're reading in Pali, you get the sense that you're reading the words that the Buddha himself used. Even if he said samjya rather than sanya, or vijnana rather than vijnana, but the words are so close that you get the sense that you're reading, and some even prefer to listen to the suttas it recited in Pali. You get the sense that you're hearing the actual Buddha word. So that is one sort of, we call it an inspirational advantage, and more from a perspective of intellectual understanding. The words used by the Buddha often quite technical and very precise in meaning. And when you rely on an English translation, even good ones,
like these, yeah.
like those. When you rely on English, even good English translations, you're still getting them through the Buddha's teachings through the medium of another language in which the words have different resonances, different connections, different sort of underlying, sometimes metaphorical echoes.
And you don't see, like if you read one person's translation of this sutta and another person's translation of that sutta, you don't see the connections of the stock phrases or the pericope. Don't see those connections. Well, Bhante, you've been so generous with your time. This has been a real joy for me. We probably will break this up into 2 segments. But yeah, I hope everyone enjoyed this, and I hope everyone can take advantage of Bhante. He does offer teachings every Saturday online in the mornings and Wednesday evenings as well.
Wednesday is just the meditation, the guided meditation.
Are those online?
Actually, we have the chanting, the Pali chanting from 7 till usually to 7:15.
Okay.
And then we have a guided metta loving kindness meditation from about 7:15, 7:20 to 8 or 8:05.
And that's online as well. I can find a
Yeah,
link.
but people have to register to get the links.
Okay. Is there any other way that people can, I mean, all of your books are available, well, many of them through Wisdom or through the Pariyatti, Pariyatti Press.
Yeah.
So people can definitely, as you can see, they're beautiful. People should order them. Any other way that you feel like people can hear more of your teachings or learn more?
Through YouTube, like all of the talks that I gave here at Chuang Yen Monastery, I think from 2010 to about 2016, I did talks on the Majjhima Nikaya. I think the early ones were done during the period when YouTube was not allowing long YouTube videos, so some of them were broken up into segments. But then later the whole talks were on YouTube. So there was the talks on the Majjhima Nikaya. Then I think after doing that, 2016 maybe, 2017, then I started talks on selected suttas from the Anguttara Nikaya. And there are lots and lots of them available on YouTube. And then if anybody's interested in the Abhidhamma, over Labor Day weekend, starting 2016, 17, 18, 19, I went through the entire comprehensive manual of Abhidhamma. And so you would find that you would go into the YouTube search, my name, Abhidhamma, start off and then put the year 2013 to get the first series. And then after that, I think you can get from 2014, 2015, 2016.
Yeah, so for anyone doing the Mission Majjhima project, we just have our 9 or 10-minute videos, but Bhante will sometimes have like 4 or 5 or 6 hour plus long videos. So we do put links to those. People should check that out. And in these other ways, my questions might not have been the best for you to be able to see it, but Bhante is both, as you could tell with this, very erudite, very circumspect, very careful with how he speaks, but also he is hilarious. So Bhante, thank you so much for letting me come and visit.
Okay,
and thank you.